Welcome to It's a Controls Problem, where we do precision guesswork based upon unreliable data given to us by those of questionable knowledge. I'm your host, Charles Johnson. Well, welcome everyone to another episode of It's a Controls Problem. I am your host, Charles Johnson, and I'm here with podcast producer extraordinaire, Matthew. Matthew, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, buddy?
Oh, I am living the dream as usual. And today we have a special guest. He is the co-founder and managing partner of Unified Controls, Dave Mulcahy. Dave, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
So, every controls technician or engineer kind of has this one like welcome to the sandbox moment, early in their career where things go sideways. So what was that first, major baptism by fire moment for you? And what did that teach you about how buildings work?
Yeah, well, it's a good one. I would say for me, it was definitely early on in my career. Probably couldn't have been more than 3 months on the job. And at that time, when I was working back at formerly ESI, Environmental Systems, and based out of Milwaukee, Green Bay, and Chicago. And I was down in the Chicago branch, and we do, a handful of police stations, fire stations down there at that time. And we did get a call kind of late on a Friday afternoon, of course, that one of the sites, kind of a real high level site that's down there. I won't name it, but definitely needed some service. And it was monitoring their backup generator system at a communication site. And, at that time, that was probably maybe like the second time I've ever saw, a Siemens Raptor controller. And, at that time, barely knew what I was doing. And I think everyone can kind of relate to, the early LAN controllers, especially trying to LAN tunnel through from Niagara in the early days. It was pretty much a game. You'd have to, basically restart your computer 3 or 4 times, jump up and down, spin around. Eventually, you'd get connected to the controller and you try to figure out what's going on. And in this particular job, it was simply just monitoring, so it wasn't too critical for control. But it was more of an integration into a larger Siemens system that had a full, command and control. We were feeding it information, critical information, and I didn't really know what I was doing. So it was kind of like baptism by fire. On the phone, my nearest coworkers were, an hour and a half north of Milwaukee. Through the support, I think just not giving up, trying every single thing I could possibly think, every, lifeline to reach out. That really kind of told me, just to slow down and pay attention to like the easy things. Don't just assume that, this scenario couldn't have happened or that's not possible. Go through, take your time, test all the different scenarios to really kind of see, what the underlying, what the root cause could be. So, unfortunately, I think my coworker did come down around 2 or 3 in the morning the next day while I was still there. So we get it all resolved. But it was definitely one of those things, one of those situations I'll never forget about. I mean, it was definitely, wow, this is controls. I'm not sure if I really like it, type scenario. So.
Yeah, I think everyone kind of gets that. I remember I was mentoring someone, and they made me drive to Virginia, like an hour and a half from where I was, just because they transposed a number on like on a neuron ID, and I'm like, it's literally right there as you discovered it. Yeah, but I had it written down wrong. Okay, so after you wrote it down incorrectly and you only saw that one remaining, you didn't think, okay, maybe, just maybe that's the one I was looking at. Mm-hmm. And they were like, well, no. And I'm like, but it's the only other one that you couldn't discover. Well, I just thought I couldn't discover this one. I was like, but all of them discovered. Yes. Okay. That's the controller.
Yeah.
Well, but we need to go check the Neuron ID. No, I already have. Before I came down, I got up on a ladder and took a picture, and here it is. And like, I just kind of had this face palm thing. I was like, oh. I also had, that was the same guy who only dealt with BACnet prior and was just used to discovering devices and bringing them in, had never dealt with LAN before.
Mm-hmm.
And so he literally did. He just discovered all the devices because he thought that they would just do whatever. And then he just brought them in and matched them to whatever it was. And I was like, no, that's not even how this even, you're not even in the ballpark. You're only thinking about, you're at home thinking about going to the ballpark. Like you've just like looked up the schedule to see if it was even available for you to go to. It was, yeah. And you're going to find those things a lot.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, LAN itself is just a tricky animal, right? I mean, it's, at face level, it looks great. It's Neuron IDs, very similar to, device IDs and BACnet, great. But if it only stopped there, of course, then you have channels and subnodes, and it can get really crazy really quick, especially if you stumble across an advanced site that, someone really knew what they were doing. And it's pretty amazing how in depth you can go with LAN. So I'm kind of glad it's done. I mean, I remember hiring people throughout the years, and the less and less you put in of LAN, and it became very difficult to service it, right? Because there'd only be one or two people on staff that even had the software anymore to be able to help. So excited for the T1, that's for sure.
Well, so that actually was also a discussion that happens on the building subreddit today, where someone was like, I'm not sure if T1 is good or whatever. Someone's like, in new construction, it can be really good against, long runs and whatnot. And someone's like, yeah, it solves a lot of problem. I'm like, no, it does not. I was like, as long as it's daisy chained, then yes. But if you're using a mixed topology, then no, it is not. You're going to have to make sure it is daisy chained. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, in some cases, the T1L works out really well. As a matter of fact, I actually have T1L here in the house. I'm actually testing some T1L adapter or converters to talk to Niagara devices. And so I actually have one here in my office, and literally, 60, 70 feet down from where I am, I actually have a controller in my room right now that I'm actually connecting to using T1L, and I'm not really noticing a performance difference at all, So I really think that's a good one there.
Yeah, I agree.
So you've been in the business for quite some time, and so over you've been there for 20 plus years at least.
Yeah.
And so over those years in the building automation, smart buildings, you've worked across massive infrastructures, government facilities, data centers, healthcare, and even retail distribution. How did navigating those wildly different environments shape, your view on what a successful controls project looks like?
Yeah, I think it's really kind of had to be a little bit of baptism by fire, right? When you get into a different vertical, one that you haven't really experienced yourself, or even your team hasn't really experienced that vertical too much, there's quite a bit to learn. I think we would all agree that no building out there is a snowflake, or every building, it should be a snowflake, I should say. And it's as much as even on a multi-site retail that you'd wish up and down that it would be just cookie cutter, the same controllers, same points every single time. There's always that oddball, right? And more than likely, almost every building is different. So I think, as far as the landscape goes, with these different, markets and verticals, there's the solution and the architecture is also different a little bit for each of these, right? So some of these could be completely, third-party hosted, right? Maybe hosted by Unified Controls or another provider that's out there. It could be hosted directly on the client's, vendor net or VLAN. So I think, as you kind of go and, deploy at scale a lot of these different solutions, you're going to run into a lot of challenges. And I think the biggest thing that we kind of, which I'll lead into a little bit here, which we can definitely circle back on, is just the talent, right? How do we bring on so many engineers that are Niagara for experts or Distech experts or Honeywell optimizer experts, LinkSpring experts to go through and program at scale like that. And I think that was a real challenge for us. I mean, we deployed, I think our busiest year at CBRE, we probably were doing 900 sites in a year. And I think, I look back at that and I say, that might be probably our single greatest deployment ever, right? And maybe it's in the history of the world, who knows? That many buildings and consistent. How do we get to that point? And we did take multiple approaches. So when we brought on engineers, it wasn't necessarily something that it was, hey, we need you to learn all of the point-to-point checkout. We need you to travel on site for a week, come back, do the graphics, work with a third-party commissioning agent or a tab. We kind of almost took an assembly line approach, which, I mean, as far as like career pathing for an individual, is that really the best for them? No. But I think it definitely helped us get through deploying that many sites. So, going forward with it, we did specialize, people did specialize just in graphics, or they did kind of a little bit of graphics and programming. We did try to limit the on-site time or trips to, 50%. So every other week, perhaps you'd be on the road, but you'd be there with a team member, right? You wouldn't ever be solo on the road. So deploying that way, I think made it a little bit more fun, right? Instead of just a lonely journey throughout, the world, essentially to deploy all these sites. But that type of thing, right, which was really for more of warehouse distribution, that was a little different than an office space that's in Phoenix, right, or a data center that's in Seattle. All those different strategies, control strategies, sequence operations, those types of things get much, much more complex when there's a plant involved or, large air systems involved. And I would even go back to saying, like, even in the public or in the private space, I should say, is different than public. When we do government type things, I swear it's probably leave it up to GSA that every single building is some sort of new control strategy. It's neat. I mean, to do actual controls on, a plant. I remember doing a plant, just kind of looking over one that wasn't quite working quite right for a sequence. And we did, it was, started off as a simple, we have a chiller, great. We had, or a multi-stack unit type chiller with geothermal. Totally makes sense how to control that. And then, later on, years down the road, someone decided to add an absorption chiller and a cogen all into the same plant. And, how do you run all that equipment all at the same time? Well, you can't. Number one, that's the biggest problem. And, as far as like the knowledge of, a building engineer that's been there 10, 15 years, they understand how that plant should run. But if there's turnover, if there's, new employees, that sort of thing that are coming in, they're not going to have that knowledge. There's going to be quite a gap. So, you do find yourself in situations where the building automation system, the way it was programmed, allows you to turn on all of those things at the same time. But I think that's kind of where, going back and making sure with like a seasoned engineer or senior engineer that really can truly understand that, you can't run the absorption chiller and the multi-stack unit at the same time because temperature wise, it just doesn't work out in their plant. So it's just little things like that I think are different, that you'll never see something like that at a warehouse distribution client. But you are going to see that maybe in a federal building. You may see that in a data center, even a public ice rink, something like that. You may have different types of equipment kind of to deploy. So definitely fun. But yeah, I think that's why I love this industry so much, is just there's so many new challenges, and even the technology, the way it evolves, and we have so many cool things coming out in the market. It's the end of the day, it's all those experiences that really make your career. And I think what I've seen quite a bit, especially in the last, anytime since COVID, so in the last 6 years, a lot of engineers, they want to program remote. And, doing something like that, yeah, I mean, you could, if you had 20 years under your belt and you understood how things work. But if you asked me to go program a chiller plant remotely, even with my 20 plus years experience, I'd still be nervous, definitely. So it's just hearing how the equipment operates, using your eyes and ears, talking with the engineers on site that run the building. All of that stuff is invaluable, and that's really how you become knowledgeable and kind of an expert at programming, throughout the industry. So.
Yeah, I think that's, you brought up some really good points. The first one is knowing what people are good at and forming a team. You have a person that may be good, that has a great mechanical background, but maybe not necessarily, good with programming. But you have a person who understands, how another side works, how Niagara works, how, dealing with the IRM programming or dealing with GFX, they may understand how that stuff works, and they can put that together in combination with someone who really knows the mechanical side, and then, form that great team to just kind of go and, kick ass and take names later. And you're right about things like understanding, whether to run, an absorption chiller with another chiller at the same time. Those are things that sometimes you have to, there are things that you can read about, but some things you learn the hard way as well. And it's not just something that, some things stick in your brain because you have to. Like, for example, I live in Charleston, South Carolina. And so I was dealing with we sold controls to a restaurant, and I was like, that's kind of strange. And the mechanical company that was there at the time actually wanted the controls there. I was like, okay, but whatever. And so, however, someone tied the chill water to the ice machine. Mm. And so, they were like, hey, the chiller needs to run on a time of day schedule. I was like, no can do, bro. And they're like, why? I'm like, and I pointed to the ice machine. Like, I didn't say anything, like, that thing right there. And they're like, why? I'm like, it's an ice machine. It needs continuous water to run. I can't shut the chiller off without doing anything. And they're like, we don't understand. I'm like, okay, if I have to sit here and take the time to explain why I cannot shut off a chiller just before, and the ice machine wasn't even that big. It was just that they ran the chill water to it. I was like, this was the most inefficient thing that I had seen. They're like, well, how do we fix it? I'm like, well, I don't know what you can do right now. I'm like, you're going to have to do some repiping and get domestic water somewhere and all that other stuff. I was like, and I don't know any of the rules and regulations from restaurants specifically, because I've never done controls for a restaurant before. But, I was like, I would think that, at this point, it is what it is, and you're just going to have to pay a bill.
Yeah.
So it's just some of that stuff that you see, like, you just kind of have to have that mechanical knowledge right off the top. And so like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because someone would just read that sequence and shut the chiller off. And I'm like, well, yep. you can't, right? Like, well, the sequence says, I understand what the sequence says to you right now, but yeah, we'll create an even bigger problem there. But no, I really like your analysis on that, and yeah, you're right. With government facilities, anything is possible to see, mm-hmm. and they add things because they see whatever, like, there's another administration or an agency that has S before it and another consonant before that. It is 3 letters. I remember there was an ice plant, and I was like, "Why are we?" I'm like, "You guys don't even." They're like, "We care about reliability over efficiency." I'm like, "Then why do you even have an ice plant?" Like, I don't. Like, I don't know. I'm like, you're just going to start the chiller anyway, and you really don't care about the ice it's making. And I'm like, all right, fine, whatever. And then they added another chiller. They called it a templifier, and I looked at it, I was like, so that's a special chiller. I'm like, is that like a heat pump chiller? Like, that's what I was just kind of like trying to think of it. And they're like, yeah, it's exactly what it is. So I'm like, but you called it templifier. They're like, yes. I was like, I've never heard of that name before, but I'm like, all right, it's a special chiller. Got it. Cause I looked, I was like, oh, that's a chiller. And they're like, no, it's a templifier. I'm like, okay, well, let me quickly look that up. And
I could totally see that, Charles. I mean, it's, even for us, like doing work, internationally, I mean, we're coming across equipment I would never call what they're calling it, right? And I'm like, no, that's just a fan coil. It's a fancy fan coil. Nope, that's geothermal, or this is a heat pump, and it's just interesting how all of civilization, all things, and obviously there's million different ways that every controls company is naming their points. So we won't get into that, but I mean that's just a whole other data. So it's not a shock at all. I mean, it's every industry I think is just different terminology, for the same thing basically.
Mm-hmm. Yep. No, I agree. So, I'm going to switch gears just for a moment. With for a lot of people who don't know what unified controls is, why don't you give a little history on that background?
Yeah, so Unified is rather new. Obviously, myself, Brian Oswald, Mike Johnson, the 3 of us have been around the industry for quite some time. But we've kind of looked at this and said, we've enjoyed working together. We haven't been working together for a while, and looking at what we can offer in the industry, we kind of said, there's really, and this kind of goes from our experience, that it's really difficult to find highly qualified resources. And then I think, thinking back to like our warehouse distribution example that I was talking about earlier, it's very difficult to find a high quantity of resources, and then what are you going to do after that project's done? So to simply ramp up and down that fast. So that kind of really made us think, like, how could we provide or create a company, right? That there is a professional services company that could, help out with those ebbs and flows for other controls contractors that are out there. So, simply, hey, we need help with drawings, whether it's AutoCAD or Visio. We need to do point-to-point checkout on this site. We just need an extra set of hands to work along our engineers that are there. Totally makes sense to kind of hire. So that's really how the genesis started here with the company. And obviously we want to be a global provider, similar to what we all, when we used to work at CBRE back in the day. Together to provide, kind of a boutique controls master systems integrator that's very agnostic, and we can actually truly have interoperable systems along with AI and data analytics. So that's really the reason why we started Unified. And I guess you really could just say we miss working with each other, but they're good guys.
So in your mind, what is your definition of a master systems integrator, and what does that actually entail? Because I think that, like, you hear some of those words, but like some people know, some people don't know. So to our audience, what is your definition of it?
Well, I mean, I think back in the day, right? We'll say 15, 20 years ago, we used to call ourselves an SI, right? Which is system integrator. And this isn't a knock on Distech, but Distech also started calling all their, partners, essentially SIs. And, that always kind of bothered us a little bit. And, because we're like, well, we're not really a SI. It's really, you're just a controls contractor, and you happen to, be integrating a lighting system and, building automation. Does that make you an SI? I mean, we do more than that, so I think for us, we kind of led on to or lean more towards the MSI portion, right? So for MSI for us, this is simply not just connecting, okay, well, we're going to do the access control and the cameras and all of that stuff together. This is more of kind of that IoT type connections, right? So this is, we had a client, that same warehouse client that has warehouses all over the world, which if you haven't followed along yet of what I've been alluding to, they may order something on their website and have it delivered in 2 days. We'll just say that.
I had several deliveries. I had several deliveries today, actually.
That's perfect. Yeah, so you know exactly what I'm talking about there. But as far as it's how their systems are different, right? They asked us to directly connect, through an API into their ticketing system, to basically start pushing data, into their data lakes. So when I think of an MSI, I really think of kind of that next level. Yes, we do controls. Everyone does controls. Everyone integrates lighting systems, right? But is every SI out there really integrating all these other things into those, OT network into their systems? I don't know. I don't think so. I think there's a few companies out there that are doing those types of things, and obviously API is getting to be more and more common method of integration. And I'm glad that Niagara has the JSON toolkit, so we can make those calls and receive a lot of those responses that way. But it's really just using Niagara to kind of build and create those drivers that allow us to bring in and interact with all those systems. So really almost more of a single pane of glass. And that's really what that customer is looking for.
You're looking to build, to me, I think like MSIs, like if I were to, if I were to categorize it, you provide a total solution. Some people who have solutions in their name, like they represent just a Distech or a Honeywell or a Johnson. I'm like, well, that's not a solution. That is a singular product that you're using, but you're not encompassing everything that you could do. It's funny mentioning JSON Toolkit. I hate JSON Toolkit with a passion. Specifically because of SMAs, I've never really cared about SMAs. So like usually I just write like a program object and then, right, use the API in there and then just create like my JSON, like I'll just create a string from that and just do all the hard coding. So yeah, I make myself, I put a lot of work for myself there, but yeah, it avoids, continuously people with SMA.
Thing. I just said it was an easy thing, right? As long as you have your SMA. Right? And all your T's crossed and your I's dotted.
Oh, absolutely. I think that for, if you are pressing those, and I think they're good habits. I think it's a good habit to have an SMA. Like I am definitely not anti-SMA at all. I know that we just have, I know that I've dealt with a lot of people who don't buy into it, even though that I stress the importance of it. So it's like, all right, well, I guess I have to do with what I have to do with what you have. And here's how you get it. Here's more money for this, pay me. Or you could just pay for the SMA and I drop HTTP client and JSON toolkit in there and be done.
Right. Yeah.
like which one?
Yeah. Do you just like to pay endless money? Yeah. That's perfect. No, I think the MSA is tough because it's, you want to sell it on the, the cybersecurity piece, right? Of saying, hey, we can always make sure you're patched, which is all valid points. And I support that as well. I think it's hard for, clients, again, at scale. If you only have one or two buildings or it's a small campus, it's probably easy enough to budget in. But when we're talking, $500,000 to, $2 million in SMA, charges, a lot to budget. And that's a lot of stuff has to get approval, and it's a lot of red tape to cut through to get them there. So, I think it goes back to like the solutioning, right? I mean, Niagara's an amazing product. That's all I've ever really put in for a head end, but I think every customer is a little bit different, and depending if it's like a small box retail solution, I don't know if I'd put Niagara in at least at the site level. I think there's enough controllers today that are advanced and secure. Maybe like a Distech, stat we've talked about putting those types of things in, and that's for my understanding, at least from what Distech's told everyone, right, is there is no SMA. There's free firmware updates for the life of that controller. So I think that's a really interesting disruption that they've kind of gone to, and I think that's also why people kind of gravitate to putting in more of that type of system. Where if I get in a argument with my SI and I'm the customer, I can go out to the marketplace and find another person that can help me out and program and service my Distech, and it's I'm not just tied to that branch type mentality, right? So
yeah, I mean that no SMA movement, was a real big thing. I mean, and in some cases it still is, and I think there's arguments for one way or the other. Like if I were just as an aside, because I've got some other questions here as well, especially about your company. But like if you have an edge device, regardless of brand, right? A lot of them are lifetime SMAs. Now, some of them aren't. Some of them require an SMA, but if you have a lifetime SMA, well, guess what? Now you can't use JSON Toolkit. You can't use anything like that, right? So sometimes you're limited by that specifically. But yeah, for people who are continuously, wanting to pay those fees for hundreds or even thousands of devices, it's really hard to even support like the ESMA as well, right? Yeah, so like now like IT people, they know SMAs because it's stuff they have to do all the time for their for a lot of their products. So for them, it's easy to roll in the cost. But for the end user specifically, it's hard to justify that because they don't see the return on that specifically. But you're right, like security and stuff like that is really important to have. And, when there's a new vulnerability, oh, well, we need to have the latest and greatest now because of this vulnerability. Oh, well, you haven't updated your SMA in 8 years. Right. Why don't you just buy a new Jace with like a 5-year SMA, and it's probably cheaper than buying the. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, like things like, even if you dealt like with Carrier iView, right? Like some of those smaller things probably are good. Like, or even like, Prolon or 75F or whatever, like little small things here and there, like could be great for those kind of solutions. But for a larger scale, you do need, I think, some more robust products. Sorry, words are hard today. So your mission, as a company is focused heavily on creating, truly unified buildings. So in your eyes, what is the biggest reason traditional BAS systems remain fragmented and siloed? Like, is it a technology problem? Like, is it a culture problem? What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's really twofold in the sense. I think a lot of the providers out there, and again, that's not to knock providers, it's hard to find talent that's so multifaceted, meaning how can I go out on the marketplace, build a company and a team that, they're controls experts, they're Niagara experts, they're AI experts, analytics, tie all that stuff together and be successful. That's one part of it. I think the second part is really just education in the marketplace, right? And I think shows like Realcomm, Niagara Summit, they do a good job, kind of just like wetting the framework, putting out there, some definitely good thought leadership on what's out there, what's going to come down the road. But I think it's overwhelming for clients, right? I think they don't really know where to start. And I think for us, like we've had the most success, not necessarily just doing bid and spec work, which, again, we will do it, absolutely. But it's really building that owner direct relationship where, it could take 12, 18 months before we actually have something deployed, even a pilot deployed, right? Because there's so much thought about cybersecurity and architecture and, what systems do we want? connected. And, you think for us, right, our minds all go a million miles a minute. Oh, that should take us like 2 weeks. We'll get it all figured out. But for the customer, they have to just absorb it. And sometimes it's just so much information. It takes a long time to walk them through it. So I think, with both of those type of issues that are out there, and I think they're getting better, right? As we kind of, customers are getting more educated, teams are getting better. They're using AI, tools like Claude to kind of help bridge some of those gaps. I think it's in the right direction. I don't think we're going to be quite there yet, but I do see, like, most of these companies I'm talking to now, I'm talking with their teams, and they're using AI type tools to help them do bits and pieces of work. And again, I always go back to like spot checking stuff. I'm like, yeah, I think it kind of missed it. Like, this isn't the intent. This isn't what it is the result. So don't think of it as an easy button, right? But it's definitely something that I think can be a second set of eyes, or help you, something that you can delegate work to. It's not going to sit and program your entire job. I don't see that happening, at least for the next 5-10 years for sure. But it has come quite a long way. So I think tools like that, and then again, like I said, the customer education, really understanding, listening to what their pain points are. I think that's really helped kind of bridge those gaps a little bit. So from our standpoint at Unified, it's really, we know we've been on both sides of it. We understand, especially having the opportunity to work at CBRE, the three of us have. We've seen hundreds of customers, right, in the Fortune 500. So we've had many sales pitches. We've been able to, diagnose a lot of different problems, see a lot of different problems, from office spaces to data centers to distribution, you name it. And every customer has a unique challenge, a set of challenges. So you can't just go in, assume, this is a solution. It's really going to be more, talking through that with them, understanding their pain points, and then kind of coming back to, what is the best set of solution. And maybe there's multiple, right? But trying to help them narrow it down, so that they're going to get the most out of their system that they're looking for. So.
Yeah, that's a really, I really like that answer a lot. I think it is, as customers do get more educated, and AI is playing more of an important role too. It is getting better at finding answers. Do I think it's going to replace a lot? No. I feel I'm still of the mindset of you need to have the skills in order to drive AI to where it needs to go, where some people just want AI to do it for them without the thinking. And I don't really think that's the approach. I think there are some cases where it can be used to educate yourself, but then once you educate yourself, you then can lead. You can lead it better. And I think Claude is the strongest one out of some of the other ones, that are there, especially with Fable. Now obviously there's been some controversy with Fable nowadays, but they've brought it back at least for a while now. Yep. But I think that people are going to start pushing the limits even more. So I was looking at your website, and you mapped out this unified advantage framework, which is engage, plan, execute, integrate, and secure. Now, it seems like a lot of projects skip the engage and plan stages. So why do you think so many of them skip those two stages? And what does that chaos look like when a team just kind of jumps straight into the execution?
Yeah, I think it's a fair observation. I think there's a lot out there. I mean, I think it goes back to, again, making that assumption. Especially if it's a repeated customer or repetitive type building. We've done this before. We can skip some steps, right? But I think it really just goes back to core project management of having an actual project management schedule. And that's not to knock like my past experiences, but I've worked at 2 places in the last, well, technically 3, I guess, if you count Unified here. But just seeing how we did stuff at CBRE compared to the building people when I was there to what we do now, there's been huge differences, right? And I think it kind of opened my eyes to like, yes, every project needs to have some sort of Gantt chart timeline, and this isn't, again, not to knock what we did at CBRE, but we're flying by the seat of our pants doing 900 sites a year. Like, could you imagine making 900 Gantt charts schedules for a project? That's a lot, but you had to do them. So I think in that aspect, things didn't go so well, right? We had different GC contractors, different installers, and yeah, we had some documentation that kind of pointed them in the right direction. But it was a constant education, right? Every new GC that we dealt with, we had to, have a meet and greet, sit down, walk through. This is who we are. This is what we do. This is why, we're this client's partner. And then kind of plan out when are you going to be on site to actually do the startups. Most of all of those, because they're all over the place, they're multi-month site. There's a job trailer meeting every single week. How come you guys aren't there? Because we don't need to be. We'll be there soon. So I just, that's a different type of execution. And I think, my time at the building people has been different, right? I think we had a little bit more of a organized, controlled chaos, right? In the sense where we could sit down, we could plan out, we can see exactly what resources we needed to have, define all those roles, move through and kind of lay that out for the client to review. Once they kind of approve, like, yeah, this looks good for the schedule. Obviously, schedules change, that sort of thing. But it was just a little bit more of a prepared execution plan before we just jumped in and just did the work. Because at the end, right, we all know, like, if there was a step 7, right, it's not try to have any fingers pointed at you, right, at the end of the day in the controls world. So, that's almost inevitable, but I do think like having a plan up front, laying that clear, success criteria, trying to think through a lot of those different situations and scenarios that might come up. I think that helps quite a bit, alleviates some of that stress. So and that's really kind of our unified advantage, right? Is kind of that six-step process where it's definitely a lot of meeting, a lot of planning up front. And then we execute, right? And I think, like I said before, each client is a little bit different for us. Some may only need us to come in to do a point-to-point. Others would like to help with solutioning an entire system from the beginning. So we would absolutely work alongside anyone that, hey, this is a great customer. It's a brand new customer. It's a great opportunity. We don't want to take your customer. We just want to help you, right? And we're going to move on to the next client after that. So that's kind of our approach, and it's really kind of to be a partner with Unified, and just use us when you need to, and then we'll be there as that experienced partner along the way. So,
trailer meetings is one thing I don't miss for sure. There was in the DC area, there was a mechanical company. I won't name them, but they had a bulldog of a project manager there, and he was a bulldog. And man, I will tell you, he was such a thorn in my side no matter any project I worked on with him. And I knew any time that I saw that name, I was like, I'm not really looking forward to this, because like you're right, there are some times where we don't need to be there, but they want us there anyway. And I'm like, you're going to make me drive all the way through DC for a meeting that I don't really care about right now when it's not even my time to be there. Like, 100%. Great.
Yep. Yeah, I had similar experience. I had, an IT guy, one of our clients, large clients, and for some reason he just had the worst taste in his mouth for us. And, anytime he saw that we were involved in a project, he would just insert himself, and it always, it's like, why does it have to be so difficult? But tell you what, learn quite a bit of IT stuff when someone's always jumping down your throat and trying to trick you into saying something you shouldn't, or making sure that you guys actually know what you're talking about, that sort of thing. So part of my growing up fast was just trying to mitigate a lot of that. But that another one, like I'll always remember that guy for sure. Whole career. So
yeah. Oh, there are people that we'll never forget. they're just burned into your mind. Um, I had an incident with a customer where I had to deal with Signal. So way back in the day,
Yeah.
he called and said that his computer was dead. He needed a new computer. Okay, back then computers were not cheap. So we got him the one that he specified. Then all of a sudden he's like, yeah, I need new software. Okay, well, Signal software was not
Yep.
not that cheap. And I was like, hey, just give us the hasp key to the Signal that you had before, and we'll transfer the license over.
Yep.
And then he brings me, I'm like, this key is even belong to that software. We didn't even how did you even give me that? Okay, whatever.
Yep.
So we had to get him new software as well now at this point. Then he calls us later, hey, I can't see anything, whatever. So we go down there. I have a test set. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's actually looks like a phone, and you can actually plug it into the line, and you can actually test, to test your connections. And so, we tested it, and hey, dial out to my phone. Okay, cool. Hey, how's it going? Cool. All right. Well, why don't you call me? Nothing. The guy ordered a line that did not accept calls, but only made calls out. And I was like, how do you do? Okay. Like, I don't get it. And then he ended up becoming in charge of dumpsters. So we called him the dumpster czar. And we didn't think you could screw that up. However, apparently if you order dumpsters that are so large that trucks can't get in and out, apparently that's a problem. But as you know, when you work when you're with the government, you don't get fired. You get moved around. And the last time I knew about him, he became charge of he was overlord of the lawn gnomes. That was
Nice.
That was the last I had ever heard of him. But I don't know what happened afterwards. But
Nice.
You mentioned the word interoperability, and Matthew knows I kind of hate that word a little bit. Kind of annoys me, but no, it's okay. But we talk about it a lot, and often clients get burned by proprietary lock-ins or integrations that break during the first software update. So, how does Unified Controls approach a technology-agnostic strategy so the building owner actually owns their data?
Right. Yeah, so that's a good question, and I'd say for us, it's really always kind of having that open first mindset, right? Even when we first meet with a client, we always are talking about if they ever choose to leave, they own the JACEs. We'll have them transferred over to their new provider. The licenses are open. We don't lock them down, which is pretty common today, but 10 years ago, that wasn't very common, right? You'd have every OEM would lock their license just to that brand, and that made it challenging to kind of do work. So, and really, what we saw is just customers getting absolutely irate, because they have to now jump through a whole bunch of hoops to get it unlocked. So, having it kind of just truly be open and always having that mindset like it's our customer to lose. I think that really is a different game changer for us, right? We got a different mindset going into it where, we really always are trying to put our best foot forward, and making sure that if something does go wrong, that we're there to help, take care of the issue, be accountable at the end of the day for it. So, as far as, integrating those other types of systems, that kind of goes back to like that planning phase or that engagement type phase for a website. And that's really kind of talking through is like, hey, they want to do lighting. Great. What do you want the lighting to do with the BMS? You're just integrating it to the sake of integrating it. I mean, the lighting system is pretty advanced as it is. It's a complete standalone system. Are you trying to do something else with it, right? Are you trying to tie the access control system into the lighting? And I think that's really kind of, I'm going to say like the nerdy part, right? The fun part of doing all of this stuff is actually like doing those types of sequences. It's not just standard stuff. I mean, if you just did a bid and spec and you said integrate the lighting, done. Integrate the fire alarm, done. Security, done. Like that's no fun, right? I mean, having it all work together, and yeah, it can be super challenging, and it also could be, pull your hair out. I mean, I had much more hair when I started, but don't have so much anymore. But it's very difficult in some aspects because you're doing things that there is no documentation, there's no help doc for. It might be a lot of trial. Well, it is always going to be a lot of trial and error. But when it does work, it's actually really cool. And I always go back to like the story of our ESI headquarters back in 2009. So it's not even relevant today, right, in the sense of technology. But back then we made one of the first LEED triple platinum buildings in the world. So I think that was really exciting to be part of that project. And to do that, we used the square D breakers. Would we ever put square D controllable backnet breakers in a building today? No, of course not. Everything,
No.
all the fixtures are all controllable, right, down to that fixture. But back then you didn't have that, right? So it was the planning of trying to figure out, how do we circuit? How do we work with the electrical contractor to make sure everything's circuited out to all the different fixtures? We did all that planning up front, which was really exciting. Then we decided to go with an access control system. So back then we were putting in, S2, which was a great access system. They did have a little bit of a integration into Niagara, but it wasn't that great. We did make the jump to do the Vicon, access control system, which, I probably lost half my hair just dealing with that, but it was always exciting. We got that integrated in. So at the end of the day, you could have an employee basically badge into a building. The lights would turn on for the common areas because the access control system said this person is valid. They're now in the building. And then we'd also have the lights just for their desk kind of light up, right? So as they walked through the building, the system knew that they were there, who they were, where they were going to go sit. And back in 2009, that was actually pretty cool, to kind of do something like that. Now we could do all that today, but we use totally different technology, right? Same concepts, that sort of thing, but we didn't even have a light switch in the entire building. Everything was through access control, which was pretty crazy to do. So supporting something like that, I mean, now let's fast forward to 2026. We're actually working right now. Unified is working in that building for a new client, new occupant in that same building. And it's fun to go back and try to look at all the stuff that we did all over the years. Of course, we know where all the skeletons are buried in the building, but going in and trying to modernize it into a client today that they want to walk in, they don't really care about the light thing, going to the desk, that sort of thing. But how do they get there? How do we bring them up to speed where it is something that we can basically get them modernized and it's not a massive integration that's got 10 levels of code deep with custom scripts and robots happening in the background? That would be great. So sometimes over engineering is a problem. So I would say having a good mix between what's possible and theoretically possible, that's really two different things, I think, right there. So
Yeah, who I always thought had actually a good access control, and I really liked using it, was actually Andover.
Sure.
I actually didn't mind using CyberStation for access control at the same time. Like, I was never really a fan of plain English programming, but I actually liked using their stuff for that. And you're right, like, are you trying to control the different channels? Well, the system already can do that for lighting, right? Like you're right, like being able to integrate one thing and the other. Some people integrate just to integrate, to say that it's all under one system, but like to actually use one thing to control another, that's a whole different story. And you're right, like even during that time of, the early 2000s, you'd put a square D in there for that. But yeah, like with all the smart outlets that are there nowadays, you don't need to do any of that. It's all, it's all there. It's just a matter of accessing it, So I really do think that's a good one.
Yeah, 100%.
Let's talk about, we've talked about some facilities and some agencies and some government stuff. So let's kind of switch into cybersecurity when it comes to OT. And so, it used to be an afterthought, but now with the rise of IoT and connected buildings, the attack surface for it is kind of huge now. Mm-hmm. So, like when you're talking to facility managers who are terrified about putting their controls on the network, how does unified controls actually balance that open integration with airtight security?
Yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, I will say it's I think again I go back to everyone's a snowflake, right? I mean, each customer may have different requirements. Like that large distribution one I was talking about, that was a mix of it has to be on their corporate type network, to challenges of things that they have basically internet like at your house and there's no VPN at all into a building. How do you have a cybersecurity solution for that? And by the way, they want that Niagara Jace that's in that building just with outbound internet to connect out without any additional hardware whatsoever. Like that, I think is probably the hardest thing that we've ever, completed. But there was a lot that went into that. A lot of, custom Niagara drivers that we were created. A lot of, going through their InfoSec teams, pen testing. When you put a lot of those types of really interesting type architectures together, that is a huge lift, and something like that, you're not going to solve that in a couple of phone calls, right? That's going to be months worth of testing, finding bugs, going back, updating our code, redeploying those modules, a lot of testing that like that. So I would say like historically for me, like we've kind of had a mix, right? So I would say maybe almost 80, maybe even 90% of the time, we would actually have it on a client network, right? So the entire building automation system would be part of their network rather than standing up a separate OT network for the building, which can be scary, right? So if you just hear me there and you stop listening to me from here on out, you'd say, okay, that's what you do. You just go and do that. Well, I'm not saying that. I'm saying we also then worked with their IT to make sure that it was a completely isolated VLAN, right? And what devices could get onto that VLAN, right? And is it secure by default, meaning deny all, right? So we would have to bring on by MAC address, by device, and register that and work with their IT. Yes, like that level of complexity to bring on a system, even if it is on their network, right? But I think you've heard that in one of your previous podcasts as well earlier this year was, you can't just, cybersecurity insurance, that sort of thing. Like that's a big deal nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just go and put stuff on there and just assume that you're good and the job closed, so they'll never call you again. I mean, ultimately, you're still technically responsible if you help them design something that isn't cyber secure. So I think, working with their IT up front, and again, like everyone's different, you're going to have to make sure that, you're having all those different conversations. You may have to come to the table with 5 or 6 different solutions, to basically get the one that we need. It's just that different, that much more complex. Now, for the stuff with OT, if you're putting in OT, networks and you're not using managed switches, that's a big problem. I mean, right off the bat, like that is super scary to have anyone put something in that's not managed that anyone can plug into. I mean, as a matter of fact, most of the clients that we dealt with in the past in the Fortune 500 in the private sector here are, they have requirements. There's 0 Ethernet ports outside. No Ethernet runs outside. So if I wanted to use like a Distec ECY, I can't if it's outside the secure perimeter of that building. And what I mean by that is it's stuck in a rooftop and someone can just be on the roof and unplug it and then they're on the network. That's a problem for them. That's a no-go. So a lot of that design of those systems, as new technology comes out and you're 5 years down the road deploying something and you're like, well, this is a better solution, we'll use this. You always got to pump the brakes a little bit because it may be a complete violation of their charter, right? For their cybersecurity charter. So It's not something that's just solved once. It's constantly happening. It's constantly having to be reviewed. There's vulnerabilities that come out all the time. So being aware, if you're an SI or an MSI that's out there, monitor those sites. Look to see what's vulnerable. Don't wait for Tritium or Linkspring or anyone else to tell you that there's an issue. You should be educating yourself to know that you're vulnerable, so you can get right to your customer immediately and take care of them, so they're not sitting there bringing you, the notice from Tritium that says, "Hey, I got this notice. Is this a problem?" "Oh yeah, we probably should have told you about that when it happened 4 months ago." Don't ever be in that situation.
Right. You're absolutely right there, where, it's better to be well informed, and for you to be educated before we educate you.
Right.
Like, yes, I don't, most people know I work for Linkspring. It's not something that I really advertise a whole lot, just because, controls is controls, and I'm about any version of controls, but it's true, like, where OEMs do get information first, and we try to send that out as quickly as possible to people. But like, for example, like the super cap issue with the Jace 9000s, right? It's been known for quite some time that there's a super cap issue, and I was on HVAC Talk, and someone's like, "Yeah, I'm having this time drift here," and I'm like, "Yeah, it's a super cap issue." They're like, "Well, how come I don't know about this?" It's well known, and here's the documentation. "Well, how come no one sent it to me?" I'm like, "Well, I don't know who you work for, but we sent this out a long time ago, and it's been on the Tritium website." Like, do your research on some of that stuff. Now, one thing that you brought up about, obviously, and I'm only going to be talking about Eclipse here just because you had mentioned the ECY, and if you're having it on the roof and someone can access it by unplugging, unplugging it and connecting to that network, obviously that's an issue. So with that in mind, how, a lot of people think that, MSTP or two-wire is just going away altogether, or T1L is going to be the new thing. Well, T1L actually doesn't solve that problem either, right? Because they can plug directly into the T1L connector and get on the network in that case. So, how important is MSTP still today to maintain those networks when you can't actually, where they actually don't want that outside access?
Yeah, I think it's never going away. I mean, I'm sure there's manufacturers that'll disagree out there, and they're probably crying about, no, we got to get rid of it. I'm not crying, but you know what I'm saying. But I think it has to be still as part of the architecture, because it's not really just. You think about just something simple like a generator outside a building, right? The generator manufacturer could provide an IP device. Maybe it's an IP card for Modbus. It doesn't matter what protocol it is. It's still an IP Cat6 that's coming out of that building. That's the security risk right there. So I don't think that stuff will ever go away. I think it has to be two-wire. And I'm sure there's someone out there that'll say, "Oh, you can hack two-wire. That's no problem. I've seen a video that did it." Maybe, but I think it's much, much lower risk than having just a network cable that's really not secured and just can be unplugged very quickly. And again, inside, what is it connected to in the switch? If they're using MAC filtering, that sort of thing, that's great. I mean, that's a great step. There's more steps they can take to kind of secure that network as well. With packet capture and other types of sniffers that are out there. So I think it starts with, making sure that the architecture is okay. You're not, putting the client at risk, unnecessary risk. And then, that MSTP, there's still, even with that warehouse client, we probably were, I don't know, I would say we were probably buying 50% at least of what Distech was selling, as far as MSTP controllers, because we had to use them everywhere. Everything. So it was really not that many IP type devices. And, in a retrofit situation, that same customer had hundreds of buildings to retrofit. that's a lot. I mean, especially if you can only pull conduit or, cable on a conduit for 1 to 2 hours a day, because that's the maintenance shutdown window in the warehouse. That install went from, 4 weeks to almost 4 years, right? Because how are you going to pull
Hmm.
miles of conduit like that? So, there's other products that are out there. I think that, we looked at definitely, I think are pretty solid. Like Lumen Radio is one that's out there. That's, wireless mesh
Hmm.
backnet. I think that's pretty solid stuff. It's pretty secure. They've done a great job, over the years improving that product. So I think there's definitely more than one way to kind of go about some of those issues. But I mean, even again, if the client has Wi-Fi type devices, is that interfering with their network? They may not allow it. So you may have found a solution that's super simple for you, but it doesn't actually work for the client, and then you're back to pulling MSPP everywhere again. So
Hmm.
it's kind of a mixed bag at the end of the day. I don't see it going away, and it's probably always going to be there for sure.
I agree. I think that there will always be a need for two wire communication, and yeah, some people will say that two wire can be hacked and it's not as secure. I don't really know. I think that more effort is done for IP connections and MSTP connections. I think that's really the case there. But I think that obviously everyone wants to talk about IP and like T1L and stuff like that. And I like the Lumen Radio stuff. I have a couple of their things. Obviously they're never going to do like a wireless to Ethernet kind of thing. That the bandwidth for them is
Right.
not really there. But for Modbus or BACnet, I think it's a fine solution. Or AIC wireless. I used to
Yeah.
use them all the time in an Army installation in Alabama. We put a bunch of them there to talk to buildings and whatnot. So yeah, it's a matter of who your clientele is and what their needs are and how to meet those needs. Um, so I here's a one we talked about a little bit. Analytics and AI driven insights are massive buzzwords right now, but a lot of building operators are kind of drowning in that digital noise. So like
Yeah.
tons of alarms, but there's no actual actionable intelligence. So how do you take that building data and turn it into something that they can use in no time?
Yeah, I think it's a fair assessment, Charles. I mean, my journey with analytics started back right when Sky Foundry launched SkySpark. So I think that's in the 2009, 2010. Don't quote me on the year there. But our first massive deployment was for GSA, and we did 50 buildings in the first go around, putting in SkySpark, integrating probably 50 different building automation systems. But what we found with that type of program is, in analytics just in general, right, is it's very easy to deploy the system. I shouldn't say it's easy. It's always complex to deploy it because points are never named the same. Data is just a hot mess. But once it's deployed and you tune it, you can point out the obvious every day to an OEM, right, or that's out there managing the building. Great. I have a million other things happening on my plate. I don't have time to go check why that VAV box isn't meeting its airflow. Like that's useless to me. Like, can't you guys help me? No, all we can do in the BMS world, right, is just basically say, oh, there's a problem with your building. Great, that's helpful. So the next piece of this is how do you actually just solve it, right? And I think that's kind of where my experience at the building people, we did deal with GSA on that same side, and it was crazy to see all these years later GSA Link reporting to us and saying, hey, there's a problem with this control system over here. We need to look at this. And my time at the building, people were able to go and connect to those systems and actually fix those control issues and retune loops and make adjustments or make suggestions to actually resolve the issue. And that's really kind of put a different light on it for me. Is really what I think we're missing in the industry. Essentially, is having that kind of white glove service, right? Where, we're in the controls world. We know exactly how to solve the issue. And yeah, we use the power of analytics or AI, to look at something that's, pointing out the obvious essentially to maybe a building engineer. But we actually have the knowledge to fix it. Now, we may know that mechanical needs to be called in. There could be, something end of life with that piece of equipment. Maybe it needs a new controller, whatever it is, for that issue. But we actually have the knowledge in our industry to solve it. Now, I think with that, I think you're seeing platforms that are out there today, like Code Labs is a great example of diagnosing continuous commissioning of those systems, where they're going to basically tell you, okay, these are problems with these VAVs or terminal equipment. That's great. How do we actually take it to the next level, right? And we're seeing larger systems like plants. Obviously, we have chiller plant optimization platforms that are out there as well, doing a great job finding, tuning all those issues down. But at the end of the day, if there's always a mechanical issue, how are we there to help support that, right? You don't want to just point the finger and say, oh, it's a mechanical issue, right? Because they're just going to point back and say it's a controls problem. So helping to be part of the solution is huge, right? And stop pointing the fingers. That's the biggest, first thing to do on it. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, I think, beyond that, it's having, systems. If a VAV damper is not meeting the airflow, all of us, what would be the first thing that we would do? We probably would stroke the damper to open and stroke it to close. Can we have the system automatically do that? Absolutely. I mean, that's a simple program block. It could be a robot. If you want to take it further and invest in a bigger platform that's going to do that stuff automatically, absolutely. Totally can do that. But I think it starts with those smaller steps that are kind of like a self-healing on the terminal equipment. I just don't know if I'm really ready for, AI or something to cycle my chiller to see why it's not running. Like, it might be a problem. Maybe not so much on the large equipment yet, but definitely on the small stuff. I don't see that as an issue.
Yeah, I think I think the need for MCP servers are. I think you're seeing a lot of that trying to be tested out more and more now. And obviously, for those of you who went to Niagara Summit, you saw some of that kind of in the works as to what Tritium is doing with the MCP stuff there, and you'll see some people that are doing some things here and there now. But yeah, I think like terminal equipment, you can see a lot of that now. Like, you can do a you can write a program block to look at damper position versus actuator feedback and an airflow. And if you notice that there's a discrepancy among a certain percentage, then go ahead and stroke that damper. Or depending upon the product, you might be able to write to the API itself on the controller and turn off a DAC or something like that, right? So those are things that can be done right now. And yeah, for VAVs and fan coil units, and I don't know if I do it for a heat pump, but small unit ventilators, doing valve exercises and stuff like that. Great. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, hey, I'm hey, Bob, what are you doing? And Bob could be the name of the AI. I turned off the chiller right now. Hey, I need you to turn back on. I'm sorry, Dave, but I'm afraid I can't let you do that. Right. Open the bay doors, Hal.
Right.
I think some of that it's going to be. I think you're going to see a lot of that more and more. Especially now as we are moving. But you have Code Labs and other things like that are taking the data and using AI right now to kind of give you that whole thing. And I remember a couple of years ago at a Controls Con I was at with Cochrane, and one of the I forget who it was, but they were showing some of their analytics. It wasn't Code Labs. It was done in the business track, and they said something like, "Oh yeah, well that this is this," and I raised my hand. I'm like, "Well, why isn't it a set point issue?" Well, because AI is saying it's a valve issue, and I know, but have we checked the set point to see whether or not that actually is that it's set? Because who knows, someone may have set the set point incorrectly and whatnot. So you have to look at everything as a whole, not just one particular thing. So like again, it's all about feeding all the data that you can to somewhere, and having those troubleshooting steps to start, and then like going back and then filling in the gaps later on.
Yeah, 100%.
So we're starting to wind down here. And speaking of winding down, I'm 43. I've been in the industry a long time. I actually started when I was well before 18. My dad actually got me into. You probably know the history. My dad got me into controls and whatnot. So like I've been doing this a long time. As like Matthew McConaughey, I've been doing controls before they paid me to do controls, kind of thing, like the Lincoln commercial. But we are now facing a massive demographic cliff in the industry, and that really is the age out, that we have. So, like, we're losing a lot of institutional knowledge as senior techs retire. That knowledge isn't being passed down from even older systems to old systems and whatnot. So, when a guy who could troubleshoot a legacy pneumatic system, by ear walks out of that door for retirement, like how do we capture that wisdom before it's gone?
Yeah, it's definitely a growing issue, and I haven't seen the latest stats on what those numbers are, but I mean, to be funny, I suppose the first thing I would say is, hey, it sounds like they're ready for an upgrade. But no, on a serious note, I mean, I think that it's how do we get that education for our technicians, so they even know like what to do, right? And what is a pneumatic system? There is a lot of buildings out there today, more than I think all of us realize, that are still running, especially pneumatic terminal equipment. It's just the cost to replace it all would be insane. I think that's also kind of a known thing, we'll say, in the analytics industry here alongside our industry, because it's really hard to do analytics on a pneumatic building. It's really hard. So, but I will say it is 100% cyber secure. So think about that. That's very interesting.
Oh, it is the only open system in the world. I tell people oil clogs it, water corrodes it, 15 years later, replaced with DDC.
That's right.
Really is kind of what should happen. But, you're right. Like we've got to find a way to get it all there. And it's kind of hard because I do find a lot of people that while there are some people who want to share their knowledge, there's a lot of gatekeeping that happens in the older that you get, because you don't want to be replaced right away, right? The younger people supposedly are smarter, they're hungrier. In some cases that's true, in some cases it's not. But that can be longevity can be a real thing. So. But let's talk about for the young men and women that are actually coming into the trade today. That learning curve is steep, and while you have places like Stacks and Jules, shout out to them always. They're starting to do that there. But that learning curve, they have to have that mechanical understanding of HVAC systems, IT networking, software protocols, and electrical all at once. So they have to start learning all of this. So what is the best piece of advice that you have for someone trying to get their footing in controls?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know how many people I've trained in my career. I mean, I've been doing this 20 plus years. When I first started, I knew nothing. I worked in industrial robotics, basically auto manufacturing in Detroit, and got on this thing called building automation and didn't even know it existed up until that point. So I would say the biggest thing, because I don't really have a mechanical engineering background, is if you don't have the mechanical, ask a million questions. Ask how, what a VAV does. Ask what a chiller does. Ask what an air handler does. It almost seems like, I'm too proud to ask that, or I'm too shy to ask something like that. But that is honestly the best way to learn, and to physically see it, open up the doors, obviously when it's not running, but go through, understand all the components, right? And have someone explain it to you. Understand how the airflow goes. When you go into a chiller plant, right, that actually looks totally different on the MEP drawing versus what it does in real life. Like none of it makes sense, right? Like the pipes are not connecting at the exact same spots. It seems like water's going to flow in loops, but understanding just all of that, how that stuff works with the valves, and that you don't need a valve because water's not coming in, so it's not going to be going out. Simple stuff like that, but ask those questions. That's the number one thing I would say. And then I would say, with that, yeah, if you don't understand electrical, like learn low voltage electricity. Like that's for me, that was kind of my strong suit coming in because I'll dealt with that at ABB Robotics. My first, summer job there was like replacing like 4 wires on 2 different, Phoenix relays inside the robotics panel. And I think I had to do that like 1,000 times. That was super fun. But I was really good at crimping wires by the end of that. So, but coming into that, understanding how DC, voltage works totally different than AC. Understanding the current signals, right? The 4 to 20. Charles, I think I listened to one of your previous ones, right, about on Reddit. They're saying, I don't understand where I'm supposed to put this 500 ohm resistor. Well, to your point that you said, do you even need a 500 ohm resistor? Sure,
Right.
it's not a 249 ohm resistor. Like
Yeah, exactly.
understanding all that stuff, I think is foundational, right? But what I'm trying to say with it is it always comes back to the asking questions. So there's a lot of good online forums, which is great if you're working by yourself, but I'm a super fan of the master apprentice type thing, right? So maybe it's because I'm a Star Wars nerd, maybe it is, but having that Padawan, you going through, having them work with you every single day, understanding why you're doing something, why you're not doing something, taking it slow, explaining, that is the best way to possibly learn and get to the next level. Now, I will say, out of the hundreds of people that reported to me at some point in my career, everybody wants to be a manager. It's just a shock to me completely. I don't know why, but everyone thinks they can be a manager. We've tested multiple people. I've had people do that role, and to no surprise, it was not for them, and they decided they don't want to be a manager. They just want to go back to programming, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think going to be into that career path, maybe you're a senior tech right now, maybe you're lead tech, you want to be that departmental head, right? Being a manager is way more than just timesheets and expense reports. I mean, if it was that simple, we'd all be successful at that, right? That's no issue to do that. It's harder, right, when you realize that you're not working on the jobs anymore. You're there to help guide them. You're there to actually prompt them with questions of, what have you tried? What do you think you should try next? That makes their brain start thinking critically to be the next, self-sufficient, high-level tech that's out there, and trains them in that way. And I think that's huge, right? It's really more about being their coach. It's about kind of raising them up. And I hate to say it like this, but I have kids, so I'm going to use my kids' example. It's like my kids. Like I want to raise them. I want to teach them everything I know to pass that on to them so that they're successful and they're going to have a better career than I'm going to have. That's how I feel about when I had all of my employees, right, or all my team members. I want them to be super successful. I want them to work on the most craziest, building automation systems out there on the planet. But all of that stuff, I mean, it takes time and it's a rinse and repeat type model, right? And sometimes we have to realize that, you know, if you don't want to be, there to kind of be the coach and the mentor, and you just want to do timesheets, that's two different things, at the end of the day. That's not being a manager. And, if you're a manager that's out there today, no disrespect to you, and you're just doing the timesheets, like you got to change it up, have the check-ins, have the camaraderie. Unfortunately, we live in a world today where a lot of people want to be remote because they're more efficient. We'll say that's true for senior technicians, for lead technicians. Absolutely. I would totally agree. Super efficient because they have tons of heads downtime. But what about all of our entry level people? They're just going to sit by themselves remotely? No, they need you. They need you to be out there showing them, having them ask you questions. You can walk them through what these systems are, that's how we're going to grow this industry, right? How we're going to bring in all these new people. And I love Stacks and Jewels. I think like seeing that is amazing. And a shout out to SBA as well, like Smart Buildings Academy, Phil Zito. Those guys have done a phenomenal job, helping bridge those gaps. But I'll just go back to like what I used to do. Like at CBRE, we would go to a college, local college, MSOE, Milwaukee School of Engineering. We talk to people. They really just want to get a job at Milwaukee Tool. But we were next to the Milwaukee Tool booth and they'd see our cool graphics and stuff like that. And we'd be able to hire a couple guys out of that or girls. They were going to school for something totally different. And, that's how they kind of fell into building automation and controls. And, I think a lot of them have stayed. Some have gone back to, pursue mechanical type or electrical, engineering type roles at other places outside of this industry. But having them as our interns, we treated them exactly as a brand new employee day one. Like they went through the 2-week Niagara boot camp. They went through everything. And then, when we were in our heyday of doing the 900 sites, they were hopping on planes. They were flying all around the country, right, with our regular engineers, Niagara engineers programming. And I'd had multiple professors call me and say, look, we've never had an internship program ever that you all would treat, our students just like regular employees and fly them all over for the summer. This is crazy. Like, what are you guys doing over there? That's so different than all these other people. I need them. I mean, we have such a shortage in the industry. I'm gonna try them before I buy them, right? Essentially. So if they work out great, they have a great summer internship. They're absolutely going to get an offer for full-time employment. Why it would be a fool not to hire them after that. So, that's kind of our approach. But I love what Stacks and Jewels is doing, what SBA is doing. I think we need more of that out there. And I just say to any of the managers out there today, like, you got to spend the time with these guys and girls. Like they need it. They have a million questions. You can't ask questions through Teams. It takes way longer to chat, back than just to show or call someone or be right next to them, right? So.
Yeah, those, that's a lot of great advice that you gave. So funny entry versus exit rates. I haven't been able to find there was a statistic years ago that for every one person that entered the industry, 5 left. But right now I can't find that anymore. And I checked the Bureau of Labor Statistics as well. Yeah. However, here's something very interesting. So while right now they don't know of the numbering entering to exiting, they know that currently right now that the engineering field is not keeping up with the pace with those leaving or retiring. And by 2030, an estimated 2.1 million skilled trade jobs in the U.S. could go unfilled. That's a lot. That's a huge shortage there. So guys, go get those jobs. Also like, for a manager, I hate doing management. I'm a manager of one, which is myself. And it's I'm a wild stallion. I can't really be tamed. So it's just hard to keep myself reined in. No, actually, I hated project management when I did it. Wasn't very good at it from a perspective of people skills, because I tell people like it is, whether it was right or wrong. And I had some interactions where I'm just like, yeah, I don't want to keep the numbers here. I don't really care about this at all. I'd rather just do something there. So speaking of which, like the 5 to 10 years, what do you think, with the technology shifting, how do you think the actual day-to-day role of controls is actually going to change over the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I would love to say on-call would go away, but I think we all know that would never. Well, I don't know. I mean, I do think AI plays a part. I mean, there's a lot of things that, we've been trying with, just, again, I go back to almost like delegation, things that if I had a personal assistant, what could I delegate to them that I'm still an expert in what the output needs to be. I just don't necessarily have the time, right? It's like multitasking. How do I have that, application type, do that type of thing for me? I see that, down the road. I think that's almost literally as useful as having a multimeter in your tool pack, right? I mean, this is just where you're going to be at. um, you're going to have to use some sort of, AI tool, whether it's Claude or something else. But I think, 10 years down the road, are we 100% autonomous control? I don't know. I think you've had guests on here before that, maybe they would disagree with my feelings are, but I don't know. I don't know if we're going to be there yet. I think there's, buildings are just too unique in the sense, and I'm not trying to have that as kind of a scapegoat or a cop out of it, but I, I do, I do think it's going to be really challenging to have 100% autonomous building, and I think we've used the car example a million times, like the Waymos and stuff like that. I, as a controls guy, I still will never get in a Waymo. I just can't do it. Can't do it. Maybe I just need to be in control, but I just can't ride in one of those things because I just don't trust it. And I mean, at the end of the day, like, yeah, I'm a pretty good programmer, I would say. Maybe that's tooting my own horn there, but I just I don't know. I mean, I still make mistakes from time to time, and I always find bugs in my code. So I mean, I'm absolutely blown away at the engineering feats humanity has made, right, with space launches and travel and autonomous vehicles. Like that's crazy. I mean, just blows my mind that there's not more issues, right, just with the coding of stuff. Um, but I think there's a really good process to debug, right, in those type of industries, and maybe that's where we're headed with AI. With the power of that is having more of a solid product at the end that's a little bit more bug free than it is today in 5 to 10 years. So, um, yeah, I think that's kind of where we'll be, but definitely something that's going to be there. I still think we're going to have a need for controls engineers, probably more than we need now. That's going to always be growing for sure. But I think as you think about just educating, like take any way you can. Like if you take a class or an online, webinar, whatever it is, and you learn one thing, or you listen to a podcast and you learn one thing that you didn't know before listening to that, you know, you bettered yourself. And I think it's small steps to do that, but I think that's also huge for growing your career um, and you're going to be more of that expert in the industry just by listening. Now, not everything you hear is going to be agreeable, but I don't think anyone should really agree with everything. I mean, if you go with that mindset, so
Yeah, it's very true. As far as it's funny when you talked about finding your bugs, right? As long as you're finding the bugs and someone else isn't finding the bugs, did you really make a mistake, right? It's like I made a mistake, but I caught it. So before anyone else did. It's like if the tree falls, if the tree falls in the woods and no one's around, like did it actually happen though?
I'll just call it a learning opportunity. That's all.
Well, there are no bugs, only features that I like to call it. So yeah, there are certain features that are unwanted, but they're features nevertheless.
Yeah.
Speaking of one thing, I do have one last question here. If there is one core truth about buildings that you want every building owner, engineer, and listener of It's a Controls Problem to walk away with today, what would that be?
Oh boy. I think it's probably going to be an obvious type walkaway here, but I think it's really just going to be that don't feel the need just because something's new and shiny out there that you have to go out and chase after that, right? Especially if you're a building owner. I've seen a lot of systems out there that going back to like we said before, I won't say the word because I know you hate it so much, but just integrating it, integrate it. Okay. Like that's the problem, right? Like so, and I feel like that's a shiny object, right? And someone said, "Oh, we need to have that. We got to go put that in." But if you don't have a plan, then what was the point of having someone integrate it and spend all that money, right? And to the SIs and the MSIs out there, the controls, techs, everybody out there, I would go the same thing. Like, there's a lot of technology, and I think it's best not to be at like the bleeding edge, right? But maybe just slightly behind that, right? So, let others, poke at it. If you have time, which, let me know how you have time out there. If you found extra time, but if you have time to research all that, that's awesome, right? But I think the other part of this is let others out there kind of work out some of the kinks on it, right? I mean, the tech is brand new. There are going to be features that are going to be wanted, we'll say, on a lot of it. And we've evaluated a lot of tech. And, my other thing to the control side of the industry is, just because you've seen a product, right, and you've tested a product 2 years ago and you said, oh, this is garbage, it doesn't work, it's a terrible product, not going to fit for us, don't just write it off. I mean, there's a lot of development teams at all these companies that want your feedback. They want to hear exactly, what's wrong, what are you struggling with. They will improve the product. I mean, I've seen it on multiple times. I've brought things to attention for many different vendors out there, suppliers, and they've come back and they've fixed it just based on my suggestion or other suggestions. So just because it was bad, a year or two ago, you got to be up to speed. Everyone is trying to chase the same thing. So there's going to be a lot of feature improvements, a lot of things out there. And maybe that goes towards the end users as well, right? I mean, there's so much new tech. Ask your providers, is it good? Is this something that's a good fit for my portfolio? And don't just ask the obvious question like that, but just dig down and have them explain, have your provider explain, how is this going to be useful for me? What type of return am I getting on something like this? Or did you just put a fancy aux sensor in that has a spinning light on it and that's it? That's not helpful. Like, is it part of your sequence of operations? Is it going to reduce your energy spend? What benefit does it have to the end user, even their occupants, their employees? So I think those are all just good thought questions that hopefully everyone kind of takes away and yeah.
Well, Dave, thank you very much for being on the show. I've really enjoyed having this conversation, and there were a lot of nuggets of wisdom that you passed on to our audience. So I really do appreciate you being here.
Yeah, appreciate it, Charles. Matthew, thank you so much. And this has been awesome.
Thanks, Dave.
Just absolutely love it. Love to be on again someday.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll
sure.
definitely have you back on. And that's all we have for this episode. Remember to stay curious and ask the right questions. Until next time, I'm Charles.
And I'm Matthew.
And this has been It's a Controls Problem.
All right.
All right.